In today's video, I want to talk with you about reverb, what is actually reverb, how to use it, and I will show you some cool tricks along the video. So let's talk about what is reverb. If you have a sound in a room and it hits objects or the walls, it will reflect. And there are kind of like multiple types of reflections. So there are the early reflections when it hits the first time the surfaces, and those are a little bit more clear. You could even say this is more like a delay type. And then you have the late reflections, which happen when those reflections then reflect again, and so they get more washed out. And that's actually one very important property of reverbs. I will show you different reverbs today. I mostly use the Ableton reverb, but recently I kind of like use the Pro R also more from FabFilter, which I will show you later. And sometimes I'm using the Valhalla reverbs, but this one is, I think, really nice to see that you have those different options for early and late reflections. We will talk in a minute about all the settings of the reverb, but for now we will take a look where you actually can place a reverb, because that's the first decision you have to make when you add a reverb. There are 4 options basically where you can place your reverbs. One, and I think it's the one which is most commonly used, is in Sense. So I have most of the reverbs I use in my Sense here, or better said, in the return tracks. So you're sending here to the return tracks. So you have your Sense here, and then they are returned in the return track, and there you place the reverb. So you just add the reverb here, and you have it sending from here. And you can set the amount in decibels, how it's sent. And how this is usually explained is that you have your dry signal. I mean, you obviously have some processing on this signal here, going out of your chain to the bus or master, wherever you route it to. And then you have the same signal in that decibel amount going to the return track. And what is really nice about this placement is actually that you keep your original signal clean. But there's something which I want to prove you in a minute, because I think many people are afraid of putting the reverb into the chain itself for the wrong reason. But we will take a look at that in a minute. But there's another cool advantage, or actually multiple cool advantages if you put them in the return tracks. One is that you save CPU. So let's say you have a project with 50 channels and you put like an individual reverb in each channel, then each of that reverb plugins will draw your CPU. I mean, you can still bounce them to avoid that, or freeze the channels. But if you have like just a few reverbs in the return tracks, then you will obviously use less CPU. Another advantage is if you limit yourself to a few reverbs, it kind of like creates a type of room and cohesiveness. So it can also make different sounds belong together if they're in the same space. So that, I would say, are the main advantages of using the return tracks. But there are also disadvantages. For example, in Ableton, you cannot really freeze the return tracks. You would need to bounce them then. Or if you exchange projects, that can be a bit nasty, because then you need the same reverbs. Besides if you would bounce it and then remove it from the project. So everything has a few kind of like advantages and disadvantages. The next option is that you can put the reverb directly in the chain here. And there are basically 2 options. So one is you put a reverb in the chain, or if you have a synthesizer, then the reverb can also be in the synthesizer. Usually it's good if you have the reverbs at the end of the chain. So after your delays and processing, that way you get usually cleaner results, but it's not like a rule. So if you can kind of like put it on purpose before if you want to achieve certain things. So you always need to check how it sounds and if it's that what you want to reach with that. One advantage I see with this is that you can choose the reverb more specifically to the sound. That's something I would show later, because I use it mostly if I have like certain leads or special sounds which I want to give some special character to, and then you can escape a little bit from the reverbs which you have in the return tracks and use a reverb directly on the channel or in the synthesizer, and you're a bit more flexible, I would say, because you have many more options and can be more individual. So it's something you need to choose. A rule of thumb is usually that you don't go over the 50% here, because otherwise you would have more wet signal. Again, this is not a rule, so maybe if you want to have more percentage, so for example, if you take a sound and you want to bounce a pad from it, then you may want to go to 100%. So there are like several use cases where you can go more. If I have it in the channel, I'm usually somewhere like 10 and I would say like 35%. But you need to try what sounds good for you, and especially not only what sounds good in this channel and solo, what sounds good in the mix in the end. I see the main advantages of putting it directly in the channel, the flexibility, as I already said, and that you really can adjust like the dry wet and all the stuff in a way that you really place the sound in the mix. Then the next option I want to show you is basically that you put it also in the chain, but you build a group, a wet group, where you put it on 100% here. So it's a little bit like the routing here. So you put in the signal, it's coming in here, and then you're splitting it up in a wet and a dry part. In the dry part there's nothing, so it's just like flowing through here. And then the wet part, it's a little bit like in the return track, and then you can mix it also in like in the return track. And there's a fourth option which I didn't bounce here because it's more like a special use case, I would say, is that you duplicate the track you have. So I would go here and go on duplicate, and then you can use the reverb for effects, for example. So this is something I would use more if you want to go more psychedelic maybe with the sounds, or if you want to have one sound and then you want to build a rhythm with the reverb, or if you want to reverse the reverb and then make it come before the melody or something goes on. So that's I think the fourth option which makes sense. If you have any other options how you use reverb, let me know in the comments. I'm always eager to learn something new, but I think more or less those four options is everything how I use it. And now I want one thing, and it's actually not only about reverbs. It's I would say more like a general technique. If you want to know something in your production, let's say, should I make my high cuts at 100 or 120 hertz or whatever, then a good way is actually to try it. And what I did here is I took from the four options I just said the three first options, and then I bounced them. Basically what I did, for example, I took this dry lead here without all that stuff here, and then I put it, for example, here 0 on the sense, and then I hit Command-Shift-R and I just bounced this little piece. So that is only the audio, and I can remove all the VSTs and all the routing to make like a fair comparison about it. So let's check. If I have this and I remove the send now here, and I take this and remove this, and I have the last one and remove this, then I can compare how those three reverbs actually perform and what's the differences between them. And there's actually one thing which I didn't expect to happen like that, but in my opinion they are almost the same. So check out that. I did the following thing. As I said, I bounced this to audio, and then if you play both at the same time and we reverse the polarity on the second one. So what basically happens? If we have a wave like this one and we reverse the polarity, we basically flipping everything which is going down upwards and everything which is going upwards down. And then if we play both waves simultaneously and they are the same waves, they will cancel out each other. And the interesting thing I was getting out of this was that I'm basically able to cancel out each of them. So, which actually means there's no real difference. There was like a tiny difference, which I will show you. And there's something I need to tell you after that. So let's check out those two. So we have the one from the send, and we have the one with dry wet directly in the channel set to 50%. So 50% means that the dry signal is equal to the wet signal. And if I play them both with flip polarity on one, you can see that there is a signal in the master. But now watch what happens when we change the volume here. So once we are here at the same volume, so there's still something left, but the difference is not as huge as you would expect. Especially think of that I went to dry wet 50%. So maybe if you are using it in the channel with like 20-30%, I guess you could even level this out more. So the result is basically they are not the same, and maybe it's because of some routing stuff or whatever, or some latencies, but it's not that different as you would maybe expect. Because the fear is always that you kind of like wash out your sounds and everything will sound muddy. And I truly believe after this test that it is not really the case, and you shouldn't be so fearful about putting it in the channel if you want so. Especially if you then reach a more individual result, which you can use better for your track or blend it better in your track. But as you have seen, there's also still like a volume difference. So we had to put this 2.9 dBs up to make it the same. So that's also something you need to consider in your mix, that if you put it here in the dry wet, then you will need to increase the volume a bit to get like a similar result again. Now we will see the this one, the send, with the group. Let's bring the inverse polarity here. Let's look here in the mix again. And you can see it's exactly the same. So there's no sound coming out, nothing in the span here. We're exactly at the same sound. So if you want to go like more individual than the sends, then this could be a technique for you. But to be fair, the comparison is not like 100% correct, because in the return tracks you will also have a summing. So there are different sends which are sending the signal to that reverb, and this might also influence the signal. I want to show you those two reverbs more specifically. This is the one I use in the return tracks, and this is the one I use more in the channels itself, because this has some, I think, some cool options, or better said, like it's a little bit more graphically to set up, and you can set more points, and even if they look a little bit different at the first glance, they have quite a lot in common from the settings here. And the first thing you really need to think about is what are you going to use that reverb for? What is the space you want to create? And if you want, for example, do you want to create a big space or do you want to create a small space? And this will define do you want to separate the reverb signal more from the original signal, or do you want to have it closer and washed together? So for example, if you want to make a pad, then you may choose settings like dry wet 100% in the chain, big spaces, not much pre-delay or none at all. You really want to bring the reverb together with the original signal and make one out of this. But for example, if you want to get like a great depth of field, then you want to make the reverb signal different. So you want to add some pre-delay to it. You want to have less early reflections so that you don't interfere as much with the original signal. You want to alter it a bit so that your ears really can perceive it different and give it like also a different position in the room. Let's look in the settings. And one recommendation I have is before you set up your first reverb, click through all of those reverbs, listen to them, listen to how they feel to you, and the ones you like, you will check out all the settings here, how they are set up, where did they put the EQs here, what character they have, what distances, what pre-delays they did use, and so on. Because the guys who programmed the reverb, they know obviously a lot about reverb. To program a reverb, you need some skills, and also you will have done your research before. And that's why I'm strongly believe that those presets in the reverbs are actually usually quite good. And if I want to go for a space and design my own space, I would take something similar to a space which is already there. So you either take that space or you reverse engineer it, see what they have done, what makes a wooden room or what makes a big cathedral, and then you apply this knowledge to your own reverbs. But let's look a little bit into it. So we go with the Ableton reverb here. So first we have the input processing. This is basically an EQ. So we take the signal, it's coming in, and then we're shaping a little bit off that signal. Here in the Pro R, we don't have really like that pre-EQ curve, but we have that dark bright. So basically a darker reverb would be something like this, and a brighter reverb would be maybe something like this. But I would personally probably use more, but I would use anyway an EQ before this one, or actually I always have an EQ before this one, because if I have it in the channel, usually my reverb is last, so I have an EQ before, and if I have it in the return track, and then also the channel is sending to the return and I have it EQ'd before. But you can also put like another specific EQ before it if you really want to cut out some lows or get rid of some nasty frequencies. So with the thought in mind, what we want to achieve with our reverb, what are the kind of like most important settings? And obviously we will need to set all of them, but I would start with the mix here. So if it's in a return track, it will be 100%, but if it's in a channel, then I would go here. Just one thing to add before, if I talk about I would go first here, it doesn't mean that I wouldn't go back here. So that's something I would come back then later and adjust again once I have set all the other stuff here. What I think is really important is this pre-EQ. So we have like a pre-EQ coming in here, or on that reverb we don't have that pre-EQ, I think. So I would place like an EQ probably before that reverb. Or if it's going to a return track, I anyways have it EQ'd in my channel here. So that you, for example, remove some lows you don't want to have, and other things which might be annoying in your reverb. The next thing, which I think is really important, is this pre-delay, because it really allows you to separate it from your original signal, so that you don't wash out, for example, like a transient, if you I'll have like a snare playing or something, that you don't destroy the original transient of the sample you're playing, but I will show you a cool trick later for that as well. And the next thing I usually set is the space, how big you want to have your reverb. Do you want to have it more like a cathedral, or do you want to have like a very tiny space? On those Pro R you can control it with this and with this parameter, and that's I think a really cool feature here is you have that blue curve, and with the blue curve you can set it for frequencies. So you see like it's 77% here on 2200 Hertz, and here we have 100%, or you could say like I want to have the highs longer. Usually, like natural reverbs, you have the lows sounding longer than the highs. So if you ever went out of a club or something, then usually the thing you hear the longest in delays and reverbs and everything is like the bass. I would try to look for something like that if you set up your reverbs, but you can, of course, go also with settings which are maybe not that natural if you want to achieve something special with it. Then here we have that distance knob, like close and far. So as I said, if you really want to make like depth of field, then you might want to bring it further away or make it like very different. The same is done here with the shape, I think. So the shape is basic. Usually the shape is in reverb something like the attack, how long it takes to come to reverb. And I think in the Ableton reverb, it also defines how long it takes for the early reflections and the late reflections to come together. So it's basically saying here in the help that it sculpts when those sounds hit together. This is, by the way, the size here. For the quality, I usually go high because we don't want to save CPU here. We want to get the best results we can. And if our CPU is too high, then we will just bounce channels and to audio to save some CPUs. I mean, you can go like here in EQ, and then in the end, when you render out your projects, you need to set it too high then. For now, we have spoken about this. We have spoken about the pre-delay, about the quality and the decay time. And then we have the size parameter here as well, so it gives you kind of like the room size also of the reverb. So you could basically say those two work together here. And then we have stereo, which we also have here. It says here if the reverb is more like monofocused or more stereo, and this is also dependent on what you want to reach. If you want to bring the sounds closer together, then I would choose something which is very similar to the original sound. Let's say you have like a mono sound and you make the reverb very wide, then this will sound more separated than if you have like a mono sound and a mono reverb. And the same goes vice versa. If you have a stereo sound, then sometimes it can be nice to put like a mono reverb in it to get that kind of like difference and separation between those two. And then we have this last knob here, which gives us like clean, lively, or chorus. And this is basically, so clean doesn't have any modulations, while lively gives some kind of like randomness into the reverb and makes it like more alive. And if you turn the knob even here, you get some more like chorus type of effects. And here in the diffusion network, you have actually a similar thing. So we have again here that EQ. So you can basically shape that diffusion, the tail of the reverb, and we have that chorus here where you can bring in some modulation to make it like less static and a little bit more interesting. We have a post EQ, which then shapes your signal. Then here in the Ableton reverb, we have a few more settings, which we don't find like as knobs in here. It's the reflection, the diffuse, so that's basically a volume control for the early reflections and the diffusion network. And then we have that freeze thing, which is really interesting. You can use this for creating pads really good. So if you had freeze, it just takes the audio which is coming in and it basically loops forever in that reverb. And that way you can kind of like create really long tails, which you then can bounce to pads. And if you have it flat, it will bypass those shelf EQs here. And if you have it cut, then this means once you hit the freeze button, there's no new signal coming in, but you can turn this off and then it will kind of like add up and build up and become bigger. And then we have here the density and the scale. So density means basically it's all about, you basically could divide this here with like imaginary lines. So this is also about the diffusion network. So density means that if you put it higher, then you have more like dense diffusions, and if you make it less, then you have like a thinner tail. And the scale basically also influences the darkness and brightness of the reverb. What I really like about the Pro are that it has this A/B feature. So usually what I do is if I choose like stuff, reverbs or whatever, I put like an A version and a B version, I close my eyes, I hit the button a few times so that I don't know which one is which, and then blindly I check out which one is better and stop at the one I like more. But you always, reverbs is something which I would always kind of like listen in the whole mix. Most of the things I would listen in the whole mix, but especially reverbs, because they usually sound cool if they're like big and huge and everything. But once you have multiple sounds which are huge and big, it usually sounds like a mess. And that's why you really want to listen this in context. In Ableton, there's two tricks you can do. So the first thing is you assign a hotkey with Command K. You can assign hotkeys here. Or the second one is you just turn it off, and then you can with Command Z or Command Shift Z, you can do and undo, which I think is not so cool if you're doing it blindly. But that's another option how to set this up. With hotkeys, you just would create like two groups, and then you would hotkey them, or two after each other, which you give the same hotkey, and then you vice versa them. Now I want to show you a little bit how I use my reverbs, and one very important thing is that you don't use it static over the track. At different parts of the tracks, you will use your reverbs differently. So for example, like here, after 16 bars, here bar 17, we have the kick and bass coming into the track. There's like lots of space, and we need to fill that space. So we don't have that many elements. Everything is coming together. We just have the first elements appearing in the track and not like a lead riff or something. So there's lots of space, and you want to connect that space. And a good way is with delays and reverb. So let's listen to this part. So have you heard how much reverb this? So you can hear it's still bleeding into this element here a bit, and this makes the connection. So if you wouldn't have that reverbs here, then everything would be so so dry basically. So here is the point where you have like lots of space, you can put lots of reverb and delay in, and later in the track when we come to the riffs and the power and the energy, you need to be a bit more careful, because in solo, like, reverb is always something which sounds cool, but it can easily screw up your mix if you have too many reverbs overlapping and building up. This can get like really ugly and messy soon. Another thing, as I see it here, I want to show you is I like to bounce a lot of stuff with reverbs and then reverse it and use it as risers and stuff to already announce the elements, but also to give that rising effect, which I think is really nice. So this is a lead which is coming later. I didn't kind of like bounce it to a full pad here. Sometimes it's even more paddish so that you cannot really recognize it anymore. And sometimes I'll leave it a little bit more. So if I want to, for example, here I think it was nice to have that because we don't have any drums in there, so it added a little bit of that tuck 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 thing. This is another cool application of reverb. Then also, if you are ending elements and you want to blend them together, so for example this snare. So if we would listen without the reverb here. It's also nice, but it's also ending a bit abrupt. I mean, sometimes you want that cut, but sometimes you want to blend over that element. And I think this helps you to not only drive the energy up here, because everything becomes more like clouded and more dense and also maybe a little bit annoying sometimes, which then gives you that clearer drop afterwards, but also it gives you that sustaining of the elements so that they're not just like removed from the track, and it's like you're going to a party and you're just leaving without saying that you were there. So in the end, you want to give like a little bit of impression left to your host, and this is the same here. So listen, for example, this melody. It's not much, but I think it really helps to connect that parts here. And especially if you have multiple things which have reverb going over into the next sections. In this channel, I decided to put like a separate reverb in. You can hear the comparison. I have a hotkey. If it's gray, it's the old version. Yellow is the new one. So I'm still deciding if I want to use it like this, but you can take like a listen for yourself. What you like more. Let me know in the comments if you like the yellow or the gray version more. So I like the yellow one more. I think it sounds more lively, but it's not only that reverb. I put like different adjustments to all the reverbs when I was making this video here. I think it was nice that I could like shape it, like really the space and everything here in the chain, and leave my return tracks like they were for like putting all the other things, effects in. So I wouldn't overuse this and put too many individual reverbs into your project. I'm still not sure if it's something I want to keep in my production, to be honest, but I want to try it more and more. And maybe I would use it like on the major elements. Like let's say I have like 3 or 4 major elements which I really want to have the control over. Then I will try to put the reverbs on those and to shape them a bit. Now I want to show you a few cool tricks which you can use for your reverb and which I use here also. So one is that I sidechained the signal here from that channel pre-FX. So basically everything which comes out of the synthesizer, I chain here into my reverb channel, and then I trigger a sidechain the compressor with that. And why I'm doing this? The reason is that I don't want to have my reverb signal going over my original signal. So in that way, I don't need to use as much pre-delay, but I can still duck the reverb signal when my original signal hits in. And the same thing you can also do after the reverb. So it's still something I'm a bit experimenting with, if it's better before, after, or both. But here I found it both was cool. As I said, easy trick for that is to A/B. So it's tiny differences, but a lot of tiny differences add up in a project. The more tiny the differences are, the harder it is to find out what you really like and if it's really a cool thing. I'm taking all that stuff a little bit with care, because if you do too much like routing stuff in your project, I had like many times where I really screwed it up and I got some timing issues in my project. So be careful with that. Don't just take it, try it for yourself, look if you like it and if it works for you and your project and your DAW, whatever, and your plugins, if it's something cool. Then I want to show you one more reverb trick. Sometimes you don't want to have that bleeding going over from one section to the next section, and you really want to drop dry. And there's like a fairly easy trick to do this. Let's say we have this here. All you need to do is to get the automation here and turn the reverb off for like a split second. You can choose the smallest thing, whatever here. And now you will see the reverb comes. So there's a new reverb coming here, just mentioning, but this reverb stopped. So that way you can basically clean out the reverbs here, or I mean, if you want to go safe, but because I had stuff here, you could also go like this, but just saying that's like a very easy trick if you want to get your drop more clean in here. Then one more really important thing I want to show you is I usually put like a side chain here from my kick to the drums. So if we select the kick here, then whenever the kick hits, it will duck the reverb. And if you put that on all your returns here, and can create that kind of like pumping effect and accentuate and make space for the kick drum, which is also really nice in a Psytrance track then, because you get like more punchy kick drum feeling. And of course, you're not limited to just put like a reverb here. So you could put some effects, which I am not such a fan like in the return tracks here, but maybe in one of those channels. So what I found on the net, a lot of people use is decapitator, so like saturation or distortion plugins. I think this one is both, like a tube setting here, and then you put some drive in here, and this will help you to make the reverb like a little bit different from the original signal and help the separation between those two, as I have explained earlier in that video. And there's one last cool trick I want to show you. It's a fairly old trick which they use like on guitar riffs to make it like sound more like big. It's basically if you have multiple guitars, then you can, for example, put one on the left side and the reverb on the right side, and then you put another guitar on the right side and you put that reverb from that one on the left side, or also just with one guitar. I wouldn't use this on my main leads, to be honest, but I think it could be like really interesting to put this on FX. So it's something you can try out, and let me know in the comments if it's cool for you. So we would create like a group thing like I showed before in the start of the video. Then we put an utility here. We set this to left. We set another utility here to right. And maybe even we could even put like a mono before. That's something you would need to try out. Then we would set this obviously to 100% here. So that's something you can experiment with, and let me know in the comments if you use it and if you think it's cool for your production. And if you have the reverb in your chain, or if you duplicate the channel, as said in the beginning, then you can even mess more around with the reverbs and put in whatever like flangers and gates and really make something psychedelic out of reverb. A last thing I want to show you how to calculate reverb times. I have set my reverbs to specific bar lengths. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure if that's some kind of like voodoo magic, which people just say it will give you better results, or because you will usually have anyways sounds overlapping, or if it's really something cool. Let me also know how you think about this. But one way, a really easy one, is you download this Max for Live plugin, SICK calculator. I think it's free, or still free. You put in your tempo, and then you have all the times here. And if there's like, and as you see, there's like no longer times than 828 milliseconds, but all you need to do then is like put a calculator and multiply this by 2 for the bars, and then by whatever you want to have for the lengths of your reverbs. So for example, I have like a very long one here. I think this one is like 16 bars, this one is 8 bars, and this one is I think 2 and 1 or something, and even shorter. So I put it like to those times. And another way is you just have to think about what actually BPMs means. It means beats per minute. So a minute is 60 seconds, 1 second is 1,000 milliseconds. So we have 60,000 milliseconds divided to 145 BPM. We get 413.8. And you see it's 414 here. So that's the same number. You could just put it in a calculator and you get it as well. What I would prefer more is if you don't just trust this, you can always automate reverbs here, which I actually recommend a lot. As I said in the beginning, it always depends on which section you are, if you want to have your spaces bigger. So it's not only the sends you can automate, you can also automate the reverb parameters or the delay parameters to really fit into your project, to really let it end where you want to have it end. And one last tip is in the end, you anyways want to bounce your project to audio, and then you will see where all the tails are ending, and then you can cut tails. You can also bounce the reverbs and cut out the stuff you don't want to have. So you will have full control on audio, which will help you to really achieve what you want. Let me know in the comments if you liked that video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed.